Radio Orienteering. Why call it orienteering? Surely it's much more like geocache. You don't really need a map, do you? No. Or do you? Well, stay tuned to find out. Okay, so this video is not going to be a shootout between radio and traditional foot orienteering. What I'm going to do is just highlight some of the differences and similarities between radio and traditional foot orienteering. Now, if you're already an orienteer, you will already have some skills which you can apply very successfully to radio orienteering. So hopefully after this video you might want to give it a try. Now, from now on I'm going to refer to radio orienteering as ARDF, which is more commonly used by ham radio enthusiasts. That stands for Amateur Radio Direction Finding. It's just to make it a little bit easier for me to distinguish ARDF from traditional foot orienteering. So it's also worth noting at this point that many amateur radio enthusiasts will refer to controls as foxes. Now, the first obvious difference is that you need a radio capable of providing you a bearing on a hidden transmitter, and what we call direction finding. Now, there are two distinct types of receiver that you can use. Each will tune within a specific amateur radio frequency band. There are two amateur bands primarily used. There are other bands, but the two I'm going to be talking about are supported by national radio societies for international ARDF events. Now, these two bands are not used simultaneously in an event. It's either one or the other. But regardless of which band is being used, the event will be to the classic ARDF format. So that is using 5 hidden transmitters as controls. Each transmitter will be on for 1 minute in a 5-minute cycle. You can visit the controls in any order. It's up to you to sort out the optimum route choice. So it's somewhat like a score event, but without the controls being marked on the map. Now, however, one thing to note is that the two bands have different techniques for taking bearings, and also the radio propagation is somewhat different. So your event tactics will vary depending on which band is being used. Now, the two bands are called 80 meters and 2 meters. Okay, first 80 meter receivers. 80 meters is a medium to shortwave frequency band. This is an example of the radio that you might use. The radios are small and lightweight. Now, it can be a little bit more involved to take bearings with these, but, and this is a really positive but, the bearings you take can be potentially very accurate. And also, the signal paths from transmitters are not really affected by reflections, even in hilly terrain. So you should be able to take accurate bearings virtually anywhere, possibly with the exception of under a power line or something like that. So when you're using this, there's no real need to go and find some high ground to take a bearing. The other primary band which is used for ARDF is 2 meters, which is a VHF band. Now, this is a 2 metre ARDF receiver. It looks a little bit like a TV antenna for terrestrial TV, and it does work in a very similar way. It's very much bigger than the 80 metre receiver, but it's still very lightweight. The elements are very commonly made from tape measure. This means that they collapse when you are running through sort of undergrowth, and therefore come out the other end without being damaged. Now, taking bearings with these is really easy. You just swing the thing around for maximum signal, and wherever that is, it points to the direction of the hidden transmitter. However, there are two really big challenges to getting accurate bearings on 2 meters. Firstly, the signal peak that you get is quite broad, and therefore it's sometimes quite difficult to determine precise bearings. Secondly, and probably more importantly, you get reflections, which can give you false bearings and sort of multiple peaks. In practice, what you'll find is you can usually trust bearings taken on high ground and in the clear. Otherwise, getting a good bearing is a bit hit or miss. Okay, so that's enough about receivers for now. So what about the maps that we use? Well, it's the same as used in orienteering. That's because it nearly always is an orienteering map, obtained with permission from an orienteering club. Now, one noticeable difference you might spot is that only the start and finish will be printed on the map. Also, it's not uncommon for the start and the finish to be co-located, at least in smaller or more casual events. Now, most, but not all, ARDF people will choose to mount their map on some sort of lightweight board in order to facilitate, drawing bearings. Now, the board can even be made of cork, and then you can stick pins in and use string to record your bearing lines. It's really all down to personal preference and what works for the individual. If you've already got an orienteering compass like this, this will obviously be fine for map navigation, but with ARDF, of course, you also require a compass for taking bearings and plotting bearings on your map. So one compass may very well be all that you need, but very frequently you will find that compasses are used mounted on antennas and receivers, so that it gives you the capability of taking direct bearings. Of course, you have to be a bit careful here that you don't get interference between two compasses. Okay, so that's enough about equipment. Let's have a look at differences at an actual event. Now, in ARDF, participants start at 5-minute intervals. This is to match the 5-minute cycle of the transmitters. You get your map 5 minutes before your start time. This is to allow you to prepare the map, maybe secure it to the board and make it waterproof. But even before you pick up your map, the event planner will have provided you with some very useful information regarding the minimum spacing of control between controls, which is normally 400 meters, and the minimum distance a control is from the start. Now, this is usually 750 meters for major events, but in small local events it's more likely to be 400 metres. This means that you can conveniently exclude quite a large circular area around the start from your search area for the hidden controls. So what many competitors will do is draw a circle round the start location, and to do this they will come prepared with some sort of template at the right scale, obviously. So now you're just about to start your run, and here we have a very significant difference between orienteering and ARDF. Now with orienteering you can immediately set out to find control number 1 as marked on your map. Now with ARDF, transmitter number 1 will be transmitting for the first minute of the 5-minute cycle, which should coincide with your start, but you can't immediately take bearings. You cannot usually do this within sight of the other competitors. Now it may be that transmitter 1 is not really the first transmitter that you really want to locate first. Also, the start location may not be a particularly good place for taking bearings. I mean, that's really a nasty planner's little trick. Now, hopefully, at this point you've put into action some sort of provisional plan that you worked out in the 5 minutes that you've previously had with the map before you started. Your strategy will depend on the band being used, the size of the venue, the terrain, even second guessing what the planner's tactics would be. In fact, there's so many parameters, which is why ARDF is so challenging and exciting. I can't really cover all the likely strategies that you might adopt at the start, so what I'll do now is just give you a flavour with a couple of examples.
This map shows an ARDF venue in Berkshire. It has previously been used in a number of smaller local events. It's fairly flat, but with a nice water and marsh feature, which competitors are forced to circumnavigate. The start and the finish are co-located. I will add a 400 metre exclusion zone to the map using my DIY template. So, no transmitters in this area. Now, because the start and the finish are co-located, it should be obvious that your route will be somewhat circular, clockwise or anti-clockwise. It shouldn't make too much difference. The area is small, but the planner still has to locate the transmitters at least 400 metres apart, so it's likely there will be a transmitter in most sections of the map. Without taking any bearings, one option would be to set off immediately from the start in a clockwise or anti-clockwise direction, confident that you probably can find a transmitter in that general direction en route. In a small venue like this, it may be counterproductive to spend a lot of time trying to get really accurate bearings. You can probably recover from minor errors in your direction finding, or even errors of judgment, without wasting too much time or having to run much further. In this example, let's say I choose to take a counterclockwise route and use the path heading west, keeping close to the boundary. I shall stop near the start and listen the round for all 5 foxes, taking rough bearings from each. I note the bearings on the margins of the map. I don't draw complete bearing lines in order to keep the map uncluttered at this stage. Now, 3 and 1 appear to be in a similar direction. Even at this stage it's possible to make a preliminary decision about the best order to visit the controls. one that approximates a circular route. So in this case, first number 2, then number 5, then some uncertainty about 3 and 1, but definitely number 4 last on the way back to the finish. So now I continue on the path westwards towards number 2, monitoring the other transmitters as we go. Number 3 comes on the air and is surprisingly strong, suggesting it is close by. What do I do now? Do I continue as planned to find number 2 first? Or do I detour to now pick up number 3 first? Of course, it all depends if my assessment of the closeness of number 3 is correct. If it is further away, it could prove to be a costly mistake. And this shows you how even a small flat venue can present you with challenging decisions right from the word go. I would say the scenario here would be the same regardless of the frequency band being used, because of the relatively flat terrain. So it will be the same for 80 metres or 2 metres. Now, a rather more challenging venue in Shropshire. Areas like this really do champion the sport of ARDF. This was an actual event in which I participated. Same scale as the last map, but obviously much bigger. Also, as you can see by the contours, some significant hills with a high point of around 300 metres. Other salient points, the start and the finish are separated, and probably the biggest factor, this was a 2-metre event, so VHF. The hilly terrain was going to muddle a lot of bearings, that's for sure. True to form, the nasty planner had placed the start at a lower elevation in the shadow of this hill, which obscures the rest of the event area. Taking bearings here at the start would be a complete waste of time. So myself and most other participants rightly headed straight for the top of this hill before taking bearings. I can tell you it was steep and exhausting. Also, with the finish towards the east, the usual tactic is to leave any transmitters which appear to be in that general direction until later or last. In this hilly terrain, a bad route choice is likely to cost you dearly in extra running distance or unnecessary climbing.
Anyway, I do hope that this has shown you how tactics and route choice can vary so much and how that adds to the challenge with ARDF. Now, just a few things before I wind up. The controls or foxes at the hidden transmitter locations, where you're looking for a standard orienteering flag, and there will be some sort of timing punch there as well. I doubt very much whether you'll actually see the transmitter, which will be located somewhere very near. Now, unlike orienteering, the actual control is not required to be on a feature, but don't always assume that your radio alone will help you to find the control, because remember, the transmitter is only on the air for 1 minute in a 5-minute cycle. Now, if you're ideally placed or lucky, you can run down the bearing line when the transmitter is on the air. Otherwise, you can stand around and wait 4 minutes for it to come on the air again. Or, rather better, you might search the area hoping to spot the control flag. But for you to be more productive, you can use the last bearing that you took and run the compass bearing, as you might frequently do in an orienteering event. And in practice, finding a control by running a compass bearing is likely to be more productive on 80 metres. Finally, just a warning, try not to overrun the course time limit, which is usually 2 or 2.5 hours. If you do, you're effectively disqualified. I mean, that could be very harsh if you've actually visited all the controls and arrived at the finish 1 minute late. So there you are. That's some aspects of ARDF which are different to orienteering, but I've definitely not covered all of them. I hope this video will inspire you to give ARDF a try. In the meantime, thanks for watching. 73s.